Hello, everyone. Thomas Logan here, coming to you from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Inclusive Design 24, the 2021 edition. Today's event is brought to you in partnership with our platinum sponsors, Intopia, Fable, Arc, and Adobe, and our gold supporter, Tetralogical. You can follow us on Twitter at ID24conf, C-O-N-F. And if you have questions for this session's presenter, please tweet them using the hashtag ID24 on Twitter, and we will be looking at those and be able to include those in the question and answers at the end of the session. I'm now happy to introduce my guest host, Sarah Higley. Over to you.
So much. Yeah, I'm very excited about this next presentation by Eva Iona Panula. It's You Make My Head Spin, Reducing Motion on the Web. Over to you, Eva.
Yes, thanks. Just a sec, I'm gonna hide my video because I tend to move a lot, so that doesn't get distracting. All right. So, hi everyone, and I could say good morning from Finland. I'm based in southern Finland, and it's really beautiful morning already in here. So yeah, I will be speaking about reducing motion on the web, and I want to start with a story. It was Global Accessibility Awareness Day this year, and I was working, I'm a software developer, so I was doing some coding, I think, at the time. And I got a call from a recruiter, and they introduced themselves and started telling about the company they were representing. And well, they had a long monologue there, and I started Googling the company. And I opened their website, started scrolling, and there was this large part of the site. I don't remember exactly the details. You'll understand why in a second. The large part of the website, it started moving from right to left when I was scrolling, and I have an external screen, and the window was, well, it used the whole space of the external screen, so I can say that the object was really large and took much space there, and that movement triggered my symptoms, meaning that I get disoriented, and I felt dizzy. I felt a bit nauseous, and I was still at the call with the recruiter at the same time, and I started explaining them that, okay, yeah, you know, you have this thing on your website, and you know, I have this thing and I get symptoms, and I was really rambling there, and I hope that the person on the other end of the call didn't feel really I don't know what kind of answers they actually get when they call people unexpectedly. So I don't know what they were thinking about, but I just knew that I needed to end the call really quickly because I was feeling really bad at the time. And it took something like 30 minutes for me to I needed to rest, and then I could continue my work. But that was really unpleasant surprise for the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So that was quite the coincidence there. But because of my personal experiences, I want to share about reducing motion on the web. And one thing I want to say here is that I'm not talking about removing motion or animations completely. I'm just talking about reducing motion for people who need that. And we're going to get into that later. Who are these people? But yeah. Okay. No, I got the right slide there. If you want to follow or check the slides, or actually that's a textual or HTML version of the slides behind the link, you can do so. I've added that in, and the URL is tinyurl.com/u-make-my-head-spin. And this URL will be, maybe I can say, visible on the at the bottom of the slides for the whole presentation. I'm sorry, it's a bit small, but if Twitter's scheduling feature worked, I've also tweeted a link to these slides under hashtag ID24. So hopefully they can be found, or the link can be found from there too. This was the first time I was using that feature, so I'm still hoping that it worked. So yeah. All right. Before diving more deeply into the topic, a couple of words about myself. So I'm Eeva-Jonna, or Eevis. That's my nickname. I actually recognize better. And I'm senior software developer and accessibility specialist at Futures in Finland. Futures is a consultancy, and we have offices in Finland, Sweden, and Germany. I'm also certified professional in web accessibility. That's an accomplishment I'm really proud of. And I also write a blog. I speak in some events, and well, you can say that I'm also an award winner. When I'm not doing something that's related to my job, I play ultimate frisbee or explore the nature around where I live either with a kayak or by foot, because well, Finnish nature is awesome. So yeah. Today's agenda, or this talk's agenda, is there are two topics I'm gonna talk about. So in the first part, I'm gonna talk a bit about why we need reduced motion. So about who needs reduced motion and who maybe doesn't, and what types of movement is or can be problematic. And in the second part, I'm going to look into, well, reducing motion in action. So that's going to be more about code. Well, I'm a software developer, so that's my I'm best at code related things. So yeah. So why do we need reduced motion? I want to emphasize again about the word reduced, that we are not talking about removing motion, because that's a common misconception, that when talking about these things, people tend to think that we are talking about removing motion and animations completely. But no, there are people who benefit from animations, and they can also be pretty nice and beautiful. And I also appreciate these nice animations on the web when they are not problematic for myself. So yeah. So who are these people, or who are we who benefit from reduced motion? Well, the biggest group by far are people with vestibular disorders. And vestibular disorder, it's an umbrella term for different conditions, multiple different conditions that affect the vestibular system. So the system that has to do with, for example, balance. And I think it's located in the ear. If I'm saying this incorrectly, then please forgive me, because I sometimes have a hard time remembering anatomical facts. So, but I think it's located there. There are different causes for these different conditions. So vestibular disorder can be caused by an injury or illness or a genetic condition, but also the cause might remain unknown in some cases. And symptoms, they can be anything from dizziness to nausea or hearing changes. Feeling disoriented, that's also pretty common one. And I'm one of these people. And I'm not sure, it might be that it's because of an injury. I've hit my head and had a concussion and have these problems with remembering things. But it's also possible that it's not related to that one. I don't know. It's possible that I'm also one of those who, like, for whom the cause remains unknown. But people with vestibular disorders aren't the only group of people who benefit from reduced motion, because motion can also trigger, for example, a migraine or an epileptic seizure. And then there is this thing that people who might get sidetracked easily, well, having less animations, it can, or at least less distracting animations, it can be really helpful. But then there are people who actually benefit from animations. So this means that who don't really need reduced motion, maybe because you can have multiple, like, it doesn't mean that if you have one thing or one type of disability, it doesn't mean that you can't have another type of disability. But a good example of people who might benefit from reduced motion are people with cognitive disabilities, because sometimes animations can communicate, for example, relationships of certain items or like topics, or depending on the site. And sorry, I think I got sidetracked. I had one thing I wanted to say here. Well, okay, I can't remember it right now. I'm gonna tell it to you later if I remember it. But so yeah, now I remember it. And this is like one of the reasons why I'm emphasizing the fact that we are talking about reducing motion, not removing it. So yeah. Then about problematic movement. Are these three factors I'm going to talk about are from Valhead's good article from a list apart called Designing Safer Web Animation for Motion Sensitivity. Yeah, that last word is hard to pronounce. But yeah, so Valhead was talking with people who had problems with motion and found three factors that could contribute to problematic movement. And they are relative size of the movement, distance covered, mismatched directions, and speed. So one could say that they are, like, especially the first two are two sides of one thing. But if we go back to my story, I mentioned about this large object moving from side to side, so from like right side to left side. Well, it was big part of the site, so the relative size, it was big, and also that, like, when it was moving from one end to another one, and also it was covering large distance. And well, as mentioned, I had this external screen, so the actual size was also really big. And then there is this mismatched directions and speed. So again, in my example, when I started scrolling, that item started scrolling as well. And it was like the site was also scrolling down at the same time. So there was like vertical and horizontal movement happening at the same time. And well, like good examples of these are actually like parallax scrolling effects. And I could say, well, not favorite, least favorite thing in the web, maybe horizontally scrolling headings. So if you remember that marquee element, so for example, headings that use the same animation so that the it's scrolling horizontally, and especially if I'm scrolling vertically, so scrolling the page, like it's normally, well, it's usually going. Then if there is a surprise element that's scrolling horizontally, that can really like be bad for me. So that's also like, I find all of these factors from the examples I've encountered on the web that have triggered my symptoms. But then about movement that's not so problematic. So for example, animations that involve only non-moving properties, such as opacity or color or blurs, they are unlikely to be, well, problematic. So they are not that big of a problem usually. Though if you are animating colors, for example, remember that if they change colors too fast, maybe it might be creating this blinking effect, and that again can be really like it can be really problematic. And one thing to note about well, problematic movement and these elements, if a person has control over the movement or knows that it's coming and it's not coming as a surprise, it's, well, it's easier. So if I know that like the second time in every page when I know that there might be something, it's always easier. It doesn't mean that I don't get these symptoms, but at least I know that there is something in it. I can make the decision. So yeah, so we're gonna use that fact later in the code section. So that's why I'm mentioning it here. So, but we'll come back to that later. So yeah, that was basically the first part of the talk. So we were talking about people who benefit from reduced motion. So for the biggest group is people with vestibular disorders, but then again, there are others as well who benefit or might benefit from reduced motion, like people with migraine, for example, or with epilepsy, or those who might get sidetracked easily. And then there are also people who benefit from animations. So I gave an example about people with cognitive disabilities, and that animations can help to understand, for example, relationships between different parts of the page, for example, or like different items. And we also talked about problematic movement, and it's about space and distance, and if the like scrolling is mismatched. All right, so to the second part of my talk, so reducing motion in action. Now that you were listening to me and heard the story, you might be wondering, how do I survive? Like, there is so much motion and parallax scrolling and different things on the web. How do I, like, don't I get, don't I like face these situations where my I get these symptoms like every day. Or you might also think that, hey, there are some animations on the operating systems even. So like, how can I survive? Well, one good thing that has been that on the operating systems level, I have this possibility to turn on this setting about reduce motion. This reduces these possibly hurtful animations from the operating systems level. So that already helps. And well, on the web, there is web pages can actually read that setting. So that I've chosen that I want reduced motion. They can get that information and respect that. So how they can do it is through prefers reduced motion media feature, which is which has really good support. I think it's like all the other browsers except Internet Explorer. And there are lots of sites that have implemented this. And it was just yesterday when I was working with a client where I was checking some site from my own computer, and they were checking that same site from theirs, and they were showing it like on a screen. And I realized that, okay, hey, this site, it has actually implemented this prefers reduced motion thing, because I didn't see like some animations there, but they did. So I'm really happy about that, because, well, it's making my life easier day by day. And also, I'm talking about this thing to raise awareness about this prefers reduced motion media feature. But yeah, before diving into the code aspects or like more detailed code aspects of this, I want to point out that all the designers out there listening to this talk, that just to remember that when you are designing some sort of animations, think about the reduced version as well. So that's like, this way we don't have this situation where there either is animations or there aren't, but like there can be this, for example, slower version or like, well, less I want to say less something version. So depending on the animation there. So just a note that think about the reduced motion version as well. So back to the code. I'm going to first show an example with CSS. So like how we can use the media feature prefers reduced motion. And in this example, there are, first, I've defined a class animated content, which has an animation, which is basically like, if you know CSS really well, you might notice that that doesn't actually work because, well, yeah, I just want to say that it's pseudocode here. So I maybe left some words and things from here, but like the idea is that like there can be a animated version with more motion and everything. And then with media query and prefers reduced motion, there can be like well, that class can have less motion basically. So there is the same class name with animation that has less motion, I could say. And here we are querying the value of prefers reduced motion with media query. And here I've defined the prefers reduced motion as like with value reduce. So prefers reduced motion, it has two values, like when you are querying it. It can be either reduce, which means that user has chosen the reduced motion setting from their operating systems level. Or the other possibility is to have no preference, which means that they have never touched that setting, or they've first turned it on and then off. So basically, like, there are three options, but like for users, there are like three options, but for this prefers reduced motion, there is just two values, either reduce or no preference. So yeah, okay, you can do this with CSS, but sometimes it's not enough and you need to use JavaScript. So here is an example with just, I could say, pure JavaScript. So like no framework specific code here. So in this example, we are basically first defining the like we are querying the value of this prefers reduced motion. So I've defined a variable prefers reduced motion, which uses Windows match media function, and I've given this prefers reduced motion, which, by the way, if you don't give any value to that, it's a shorthand for prefers reduced motion reduce. So I'm using, like in this example, I'm using that shorthand. So I'm querying the value there. And because we want to listen for the changes in that value, so if user changes the setting on the operating systems level, we will need a listener for that. So after the prefers reduced motion, like the value I defined there, I'm defining the function that I want to be executed when the value has changed. And inside the function, which is called reduce motion changes, I have this check if prefers reduced motion dot matches is true. So this window match media, it returns I think it's an object which has a key called matches, and if it's true, then we will add the well, whatever we want to do inside there, we will add it there. And then there would be also, or should be, this else, where we would do whatever we want to do for those who don't prefer reduced motion. I've just left it out from this example because it's hard to put too much code in or too much code in slides. It's not good. So I had to leave that one out. And then at the end, I've added the listener to prefers reduced motion with the add listener and passed this reduce motion changes function there. These are base cases, I could say. You can get far with CSS and JavaScript or HTML, which I'm gonna show you later in this talk. There are some cases where you can do this only with HTML too, but usually it requires either CSS or JavaScript. But then there is this one thing in the internet that's not usually that easy to control with, well, CSS or JavaScript. There are ways, but yeah, there are ways. I'm gonna show one way later there, but first I'm gonna show the one I mentioned about pure HTML. So, but before going into that, I wanted to say that yeah, I'm gonna start over with these GIFs. So with GIFs, it's like it's not usually possible to show with, for example, pure CSS. This like static image for those who prefer reduced motion, and then moving image for those who like would like to see the motion or animation there. But I'm going to show you two ways of how to make GIFs more inclusive. So first one is going to be it's going to be just I'm calling it either or case. So this means that if you have this prefers reduced motion setting on, you're going to see or reduced motion setting on, you're going to see a static image. And if you don't have it, then you're going to see the GIF. And then another example I'm going to show, it's done actually with React. That's a technology I'm working most with, so that's why I chose to use that one. And there we are adding a play button so that those people who prefer reduced motion but make the decision that I want to see this GIF, what's in there, then they have the option. And here we are coming to the fact or thing I mentioned earlier, that if things are surprise, that can be more harmful. But if user has control and knows that, okay, there is like some movement, for example, coming, then it's usually better. And giving control to the user, that's always like a good thing. But first to the so-called either or case. And here is like something that can be done with only HTML. So here I'm using the picture HTML element, and it can have, or it should have like image, and it can have sources, so source elements like nested inside. And the image element, it will be the so-called default case here. And if we are adding source elements, which can be these like conditions, I'm going to go that a little later more, but sources can have these conditions, but if they like none of them is true, then it defaults to the image tag. So there should be the like default image. And then in image tag, there is this alt attribute, which will be the alt attribute that is shown to every, like whichever source is used for the picture. So like alt attribute should go there, or the alt text, I mean. And the source element, it takes a source set attribute where would be the like source of the image. And then it has this media attribute, which is the condition I mentioned. So if this media query matches, then take the source that's defined in source set. And if it doesn't, continue. And it goes like that until the image, if as I said, if nothing matches, then it shows the image. So in this example, in the source, I've defined as condition for the media query, prefers reduced motion, no preference. So this means that a person who has either never touched the reduced motion setting, or they've like turned it on and off, so it matches for them. And then there would be the path to the moving GIF, so with animation and all. And then in the image tag, there would be a path to a static image, so maybe the first frame of the GIF. So this is like one way to do this. But then if we want to have the interaction and give the user the possibility to choose that they want to play the GIF, then we are going to need a bit more. And in the next example, I'm defining a React component. So that's why there are some like React specific code. And yeah, I'm gonna explain those. So first of all, sorry, this is gonna be in two parts because again, the space limit on these slides to make them visible still. But in this first part, I'm defining all the variables we need. And on the second part, I'm gonna show the code that would be returned from the React component. And what I'm using here is use prefers reduced motion hook, which is copied from Josh Comer's article about prefers reduced motion. That's actually, I've linked that one in the slides. There is like at the end, there is a like references section, and there is a link to that article. So if you're interested, go check it. There is lots of good information, but there is also a use prefers reduced motion hook, which I'm basically using here. And how it's working, it's utilizing the same things that I showed in the JavaScript part, but just wrapped in React code and as a React hook and with some other like React specific things. But if you're interested about the code, go check that article. But here first, I'm defining the reduced animation GIF component, and inside it I have this state play, and I define it and initialize it with false, so that like the play would be false by default. And then I use the use prefers reduced motion hook to get the value if the user prefers reduced motion or if they don't. Then I have a click handler, which is basically used for changing the state of the play state. So if when clicking, if the play is true, it sets it false, and if it's false, it sets it true. So it toggles that state. And then I define text, and it's based on the play state value. So if the play is true, then we're going to show pause, and if it's false, we're going to show play. So here's the the things that we are going to need in the return code. And here we have the code that we are returning from the component. I've left out the return word, for example, on purpose. So that's why it might not seem so familiar for those who have worked with React. But first, we use the prefers reduced motion value. So if user prefers reduced motion, then we will show this button, which is used to toggle the play or pause state. And we give the click handler as for the onClick method and show the text. And we show it only for those who prefer reduced motion. And then we are using the picture element. And if the play is false, so if the play is false, then we are showing the or adding the source element with the actual GIF there. So and like there is again this I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I might have a like small. Like, yeah, I'm just reading the code, and I think there might be a little problem. But again, sorry. So we are showing the GIF if the play is false, and I'm sorry. I'm like I think I saw something in there, and I felt really confused, and now I just lost my thought. But like when the idea is that when the user pushes the play button then we are showing the this moving GIF there, and if not, then we are showing this image there. And I think like I'm not right now able to explain this to the end because I got really confused and everything. So if you're interested about a demo that I made related to this, I made a demo or gave a demo in React Finland in the beginning of the year. And there's also a link to that one in my in the slides and the reference section. So I recommend checking that out. And I'm really sorry. I'm like right now feeling so confused that I can't continue with this slide anymore. I'm pretty sorry. So I'm just going to continue with the talk here. So thank you for listening. I have here again the URL for the slide. So tinyurl.com/u-make-my-head-pin. And if you want to find me on Twitter, I'm at Eevispanula, so EEVISPANULA. And if you want to find me on LinkedIn, you can find me from linkedin.com/in/Eeva-Jonna, so EEVAJONNA. So my first name without the dash there. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Kiitos. Hopefully I said thank you right in Finnish.
Yes,
but thank
it
you.
is.
So thank you to Eeva-Jonna for the excellent presentation, and the code samples are definitely ones that I'm excited to try out on my site. So definitely learned a lot today. Thank you very much. Sarah, do we have any questions?
Yes, we have a question on Twitter, and that was from Bryn, and he asked, when can animation enhance the accessibility of the user experience versus detract from it and distract? And he gave a couple examples where one is animating a switch control. I think that's the like Apple checkbox type control versus a fly-in heading. So do you have any thoughts on that? Any examples of like where it might enhance versus detract?
I think like the most distracting things are the ones that happen without users' control or that happen unexpectedly. So, for example, when you start scrolling and something happens because of that scrolling. But then again, if it's something small and it happens, like, for example, the switch thing, I think it's not that bad because like user expects something to happen there, but if it's not like taking the whole screen or anything. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of like principle of least surprise, like make sure you're not unexpectedly throwing motion. Cool. I have a question for you actually. You had a lot of really great information on how to use prefers reduced motion in CSS and JS and HTML. Do you, and you mentioned there's really good browser support right now. I was wondering if you had like I don't know if there's data, but like any kind of idea of how many users know about it, or like how much it's actually like used by people in practice?
I'm sorry, I don't have any like exact data, but like from my own experience, I've noticed that it's like developers are like or sorry, did you ask about like who uses like reduced motion, or about the sites that utilize it?
Well, I guess they might be kind of growing in parallel, but yeah, like I'd honestly be interested in your answer to either of them, like how widely it's actually implemented, like how much actual help you get from it, and also like if you have any sense of like how widely it's known as a browser feature to people who actually need it and who may not be web developers or designers themselves.
Yeah, from my experience, well, people are knowing it more and more. Like also those who need it and those who implement things to the web. So it's like, as you said, they are growing in parallel. But like while I've been talking about this, especially in the company I work in, there is always somebody who's telling that, oh yeah, I didn't know about this feature, either in a way that, yeah, we should use it when we are making this and that site, or in a way that, yeah, it's like, for example, in Slack, you can actually turn motions off, or like animations off. And I've been using it for a while now for reasons. But like when I tell about that possibility to others, they are like, whoa, I should have known about this. Like I haven't gone to this one channel for a while because there was like all the time people sharing GIFs, but I just didn't go there. And if I had known about this, it would have been like great. So while I don't have any exact data, I think like it's people don't know it about it that much, but they are learning. And yeah, I think that's my answer.
Yeah. Another question, do you have any advice on the best way to test whether like a specific set of rules around prefers reduced motion works well for people in practice?
This one is actually hard because like asking that, hey, can you test like, well, okay, if you have this reduced motion version, it's like maybe talking it in advance with people who like need this version, and then like then well, testing with real users, of course. That's like would be really great thing in everything. But I'm just thinking that if somebody came to me asking about this, I would be like maybe myself asking questions that, okay, what kind of motion you actually have there? Because I don't want to have like 1 hour of just resting after this or something. So yeah, I'm not sure if I can actually answer that, because there are so many sides that like it would be good to test with actual users, but then again, it should be like setting where like it is 100% safe for those people that you would know in advance that these like this animation, for example, wouldn't trigger anything for them. That's a thing that I really have to think about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that answer was great. Like, I think that really highlighted the importance of like responsible testing and not making people sick when you want to test your web page. Yeah. Kind of another one. How are we doing on time? Okay, one more.
One more.
Yeah. Awesome. Are there any types of animation attributes like speed, like types of animation like rotation, translation, etc., that should be specifically avoided when someone has preferred reduced motion on?
I think everything that's moving really fast or like, well, yeah, I think that's for me at least, it's the like the fastness of things. So like making it slower would be a good thing for myself, please. But I'm not sure about that. I haven't really investigated that thing, but that's a good point. I should investigate that more.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, both to our presenter and to my co-host. Definitely want to tell everyone, you've been enjoying our sessions today. Please hit the YouTube like button. We've got 4,000 subscribers. Why not get 5,000 today? So help us and share our event with your friends and colleagues. So anyone can subscribe at youtube.com/inclusivedesign24, and that'll keep you in the loop for future events as well. A reminder that our hashtag ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. And we want to say a big thank you to our sponsors and supporters: Intopia, Fable, TPGI Arc, Adobe, Tetralogical, Intuit, InfoAxia, Center for Inclusive Design, Web Directions AAA, Adrian Roselli LLC, and Can I Access? So Inclusive Design 24 will be back at the top of the hour with our next session, and I will see you then. Thank you, everyone.